welcome to Fireside Chats with me, Dr. Peters. I was born and raised in New Hampshire, and I completed my PhD at the University of Glasgow. My research focuses on the intellectual history of the US Constitution and how we can use that history, philosophy, political theory, and constitutional law to better understand and address contemporary social and political issues. Now, today, what I'd like to chat about and empower you to chat about with others and to think about moving forward is what kind of neighbors do we want to be? What do we want America and Americanness to stand for on the international stage? Now, these questions come about due to the news that's going on right now. Many of you have probably seen the news about Venezuela. I'm not going to discuss that in particular today. That deserves its own episode, if not more than that. What I do want to talk about are the ongoing comments about invading Canada, invading Greenland, a territory of Denmark, one of our NATO allies, just like Canada, interfering in European politics, essentially supporting right-wing authoritarian political movements there, things of that variety. Being a good neighbor. You can probably already see where I stand on this. But what I'd like to do is talk about that through the lens of what the founders and framers thought about the United States' place in the world, how they might answer those questions, because I think this historical perspective might help us think about this topic in different terms and helpful terms that might make decisions and ideas about what kind of story we want to write moving forward a little bit clearer. Now, when we talk about international relations and the founders, most people beyond the Revolutionary War probably think about Washington's farewell address, his warning that the United States should not become entangled in European alliances. Europe was the place where all the empires and global superpowers of the day were. Now, his fear was, if you make an alliance with one of them, you are essentially going to become a pawn in the European power game. We'd essentially lose our sovereignty. However, this isn't Washington advocating for an eternal isolationism or a fundamental prohibition on alliances. Actually, Washington was very pro-alliance and pro-unity and pro-collective security. That's why he supported the U.S. Constitution so forcefully. He realized that if the United States, the then independent sovereign states, this is before the U.S. Constitution, didn't unite more closely and more fully, they would get picked off one by these European powers. We had to stand together or we'd fall. Now, this idea stretches back to what Americans call the French and Indian War, Europeans called the 7 Years' War. The idea was the colonies had to unite together against the common enemy, France and their Native American allies, hence the American name for the war. This is where we get Benjamin Franklin's, what today we'd call a meme, join or die, with a segmented snake beneath it. The United States, the colonies at the time, had to unite in order to stand against this threat. Later, this meme would reappear just before the Revolutionary War and during it. However, this time, the international threat was the British Empire. This was the force coming to take their liberty from them, and they had to unite, create a collective security agreement in order to stand against it. In some ways, you might say that these geostrategic concerns and the idea of collective security was kind of the anvil on which the United States was forged. And this only gains support when we look at the U.S. Constitution. Normally we think about the U.S. Constitution only in terms of domestic policy, but it was set within these geostrategic concerns of the time. This is why Washington favored it, but so did a number of other founders. Some historians argue this international threat was one of the most persuasive arguments for many of the people They recognized, just like they had during the Revolution and the French and Indian War, that if they didn't come together, they would lose their independence and sovereignty. Now, at this point, the slogan changes from join or die to united they stand, divided we fall. The imagery also changes. We go from a snake to pillars being erected into a larger edifice, the federal government. And this was persuasive. We got the US Constitution. So Washington and the other founders saw the value of collective security and also saw the value of unity in stopping interstate squabbles, creating stability and prosperity. So many of the states, when independent, had arguments about where borders were, imports, exports, taxes, tariffs, and part of the geostrategic concern Washington saw was with all this infighting, it would weaken each individual state and they'd become easier and easier to pick off. There was real concern that under the Articles of Confederation, the states were not going to remain independent for very long. And so they united. But that wasn't the end of the story. Many of the founders had another vision for the United States, another aspect of what they wanted the United States to be on the global stage. Now, I think this is best summed up in the words, a city on a hill. Now, this phrase has its origins in a sermon on Christian charity, going back to colonial times. And the idea was that the light shining from the city on a hill was liberty. It was self-governance. It was democracy. At this time, particularly among European elites and others, the belief was, the received wisdom of the time was, that democracy is untenable. Regular human beings just are not up to the task. They can't do it. And the colonies saw themselves as proving that wrong, as shining this light of liberty to the rest of the world. Benjamin Franklin later takes up that wording. So does JFK and Ronald Reagan. However, other founders presented the same idea in different words. For instance, James Wilson, at the end of the ratification debates, talks about erecting temples of liberty around the world. And he particularly references inspiring the peoples of Europe to regain and reclaim that liberty that they have lost for so long. It's this idea that the United States was going to inspire others to move towards liberty and democracy, self-governance. Hamilton in Federalist Number 1 also brings up this idea. However, he frames it as an existential crisis for democracy and self-governance, given this idea that normal people just aren't up to the task. Hamilton tells his readers that unless we make this work, unless we decide, well, i.e. ratify the U.S. Constitution, provide the unity and thus the security and stability necessary to prosper, we're just going to become another example and another argument against anybody else advocating for more liberty for normal people, more of a voice in that discussion about how we should be governed. And again, this argument wins the day. We ratified the U.S. Constitution. Now, to move on to more of the theory side of it, Immanuel Kant provides some framework that I think helps us understand what these two goals look like, or potentially could look like, when they're put together. This idea of collective security, stability, prosperity, matched with creating and inspiring more and more democracies. Immanuel Kant theorized that essentially, as more democracies, republics emerge, they would start to make alliances and collective security agreements because they would see each other as legitimate, they would recognize their similarities, they would have more in common, fundamental virtues. Through these collective security agreements, as well as trade and cultural exchange, they'd become more and more intertwined. And in doing so, they would become more prosperous, and more countries would want to join them. They would be inspired by this example. They would see the prosperity, cooperation, and collective security brings about, and we would create a bigger and bigger collective security agreement. And eventually, this confederation would come up with what today we call international law, rules that allow us to navigate the squabbles between nations with lawyers rather than guns. Wilson similarly had an idea similar to what we call the ICC, the International Criminal Court today. Again, the hope is that if we could create an international legal system, again, we could settle our differences through law and argumentation rather than people killing each other in violence. And in many ways, as my explanation alludes to, we've seen a lot of this happen. We have international law. We have the ICC. We also have institutions like the United Nations. I mean, the Charter demands and recognizes the right of self-determination of peoples around the world. Everybody gets to decide on how they're governed. That seems pretty aligned with the founders' ideal and vision and hope for the future of the United States, inspiring more and more democracies to emerge in the world, more people to claim their liberty. And we played a big part in founding the United Nations and have served as a pretty fundamental anchor pillar of this institution up until recently. Now, in this, I would also include institutions like NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, often we think about NATO only in terms of Article 5. An attack against one is an attack against all. Many people overlook Article 2. So one of the stated reasons for developing NATO is to create European cooperation and through that more political integration throughout Europe. Essentially, it was saying we've got to get the Europeans to work together and respect each other so they don't start another world war. Remember the first half of the 20th century, they kind of started two, they invited everyone, and yeah, it was not good. And everybody decided, let's create the UN, let's create international law, let's create things like NATO to keep Europe from going to war with itself and keep all of us from starting another world war, particularly because we have nuclear weapons now. And it's been effective. Europe has not gone to war with itself since. Given Europe's history, that's a pretty big achievement. However, I think the example that really helps change our perspective a little bit on these questions is the Iran-Contra crisis. Not because our government aligned with these ideals, but the American people's reaction to it. So Iran-Contra, this is the Reagan administration. We're selling arms to Iran. We're using the proceeds to fund the Contras in Nicaragua, right-wing rebel group that had lots of human rights violations, again, to put it nicely. Now, when the American people found out about this and the administration's attempt to cover it up, they were furious. Reagan's polls dropped 20%. He goes on TV. He apologizes. Congress creates all these oversight committees. Investigations are held. We're going to deal with this problem. This is not who we want to be on the international stage. This is not what we want America and Americanness to stand for. We kind of like to be the good guys here. Now, let's use that as an encouragement that, at least for now, we still have a say. That is still what we the people stands for, is that we get to decide. Now, who do we want to be as a people? What do we want America and Americanness to stand for on the international stage moving forward? Do we want it to align with our founding principles, this idea of inspiring liberty and finding security through cooperation, and along with it, stability and prosperity? Or do we want to rely on physical force to threaten and bully our neighbors, and particularly our allies, to do whatever we want. And moreover, to add to that, where's the line? I mean, in this video, we're talking about our long-standing allies. Canada, NATO, all of these countries have fought alongside us in several wars. I mean, it's Canada. We have the largest demilitarized border in the world with them. They hit our people during the Iran hostage crisis. And NATO? We created that organization, and moreover, we are the only country to have ever triggered Article 5. It was after 9/11, and they all came with us. Other countries fought alongside us there, and in so many of our other wars. Do we just go, well, not convenient anymore? Do we want to be that guy? Do we want to be that country? Do we want to be that people? And right now, this is a very important question, not just for the rest of the world, but for our own country. Right now, a new Cold War is beginning. This Cold War 2.0 is not divided between capitalist countries and communist ones, but between democracies and authoritarian regimes. On whichever side we decide to join, our country will look more and more like that. If we go down this dark authoritarian rabbit hole, aligning with those countries and operating like them in the wider world, our country will look more and more like those authoritarian regimes where people don't have freedom, where people don't have liberty, where we do not have good relations with peoples from other nations. Is that what we want? Or do we want to be that city on a hill? Do we want to hold aloft the torch of liberty and inspire others to do the same? Do we want to cooperate with them, create a safer, more stable world for everyone, where everyone can prosper, where everyone can pursue liberty and receive justice? I would much prefer that world, and I would argue it aligns much more clearly with our founders' ideals and founding principles. Now, this isn't to say, let's go back to the status quo, let's go back to neoliberal globalization. That did not work. I mean, a lot of our economic and political issues of today stem from that political economic theory. But what I am saying and advocating for is to take another page out of our founders' playbooks, this idea of fixing and improving what we've received from past generations. What I'm arguing is, let's try to find a way to do better. We should build on those things, not just throw them out. We should find better ways to engage and interact with other countries. I think we should double down on democracy, on cooperation, on finding a better way forward together. Now, that might sound rather idealistic, but from my own personal experience, I found it's easier to prevent a fight than to win one. And that's what cooperation, keeping your word, supporting your allies looks like, and treating other people just with general respect. So with that, I would also say, it also doesn't matter what I think. It's not up to me. I am not in charge. What matters is what you all think. And so if you want, I'd like you to share in the comments if you have questions or ideas about what kind of a future we want to build moving forward. What kind of a people do we want to be? We do have that power. And as I said, for the time being, that's still what we the people means. We get to decide. Do we want to create a better world? Do we want to align with these founding ideals, build on them, improve them moving forward, write a better story not only for ourselves but for others, to be a good neighbor on the global stage? Do we want to do those things? And if we do, let's figure out what that looks like and start building it together. Because if we don't, the way the pendulum is swinging right now, we're clearly moving towards alignment with the more authoritarian side of the globe. So with that, I hope you found this interesting. If you prefer reading, I also publish a blog post, a text post that covers the same topic in slightly more detail and might be a little bit clearer. And with that, I will bid you all good evening.